Thank you, Amy. And I first want to start by thanking the organizers and really thanking all of you who are taking a chunk of time out after a long day to be here and learn about this. I had no idea how many, if there were going to be 10 people or 15 people, and I'm just overwhelmed by the numbers in this room and some very old friends and a lot of new faces. And I also wanted to say that it really feels like, in a way, I'm kind of coming home. About more than 25 years ago, I worked for an organization based in Phoenix that was one of the sister organizations to the Tucson Ecumenical Council, which was one of the first sanctuary organizations, and then it was followed by the Valley Religious Task Force on Central America. And I started off by volunteering with them when I moved to Phoenix in the early 90s, and then I took over as kind of advocacy director for this little ragtag, wonderful, wonderful group of people. And one of a person who became a very dear friend, Wendy Lewin, was one of the convicted felons. That organization was infiltrated, and there were 8 or 9 people who were convicted of felonies. And it's weird, when I moved to Hawaii in 1995, I brought a lot of the library from that organization, and there are all these books on sanctuary, and I really recommend that check them out from the library. I had them all, and then we moved to Australia for a period of time, and I had too many books, and I never thought I was going to need these books on sanctuary again. And I donated to the Manoa Public Library, and I wish I could track them down and get them back, because I want to go back and reread them, because I can't believe that here we are so many years later talking about this again. But the only thing that I'm glad about is, if we are talking about it again, that there are people who are still willing to talk about it and willing to come out, and churches who are willing to look at kind of putting themselves on the line, and people who are willing to put themselves on the line. And I'm hoping that we don't need any churches to actually take anybody in. I mean, that's my hope. But I think what we have to be ready for statewide is that possibility. And when it's needed, where are people going to go? And right now, I don't know if we have, I'm not sure if there are any places of faith who have come out and publicly said, we will be here. If it's needed, we hope it's not needed either, but if it's needed, we will be here. I had a client about 6 weeks ago who had a deportation letter to show up at Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Many of you in this room came up very quickly, organized to come and support her. I think it made a huge, huge difference. She lived on Maui, and one of the things I was talking to her about is, Tanya, if you don't want to come, we can look for a place for you to stay. And I was thinking of a church, but I didn't know of any churches. And she didn't want to go that route. She was kind of willing to take the risk. But had she not been willing to take the risk, I'm not sure what we would have done with her. And so I'm hoping that in a couple of months, as these discussions go forward, we don't need 20 places to say we'll take people, and we just need a few on each island, and then we need other congregations to support them. For if it happens, then we'll be there with you. So, I was thinking about what I could contribute to this panel, and I wish that we had either a kind of victim survivor of U.S. immigration policies to actually speak to you, because it was in hearing, in high school and college, hearing the voices of refugees and asylum seekers and people who had made very difficult decisions for a better life that really inspired me to take action. The fact that you're all here means that, you're already kind of on the boat. But I thought one of the things that I could contribute tonight was a story by that I wrote about one of my clients, and to kind of bring Antonio and his family's story to the table. And this is a piece that I wrote about 11 years ago that my mom sent to the Toledo Blade and got published, because you can get anything published in the Toledo Blade, almost. And so I feel like I just want to share his story with you. He can't be here. He was deported to Mexico, but I want to share his story through my eyes. So I looked over the intake notes that were given to me by an assistant. Male, Mexican national, iwi, which means entered without inspection, previous deportation, picked up by ICE on Maui, no criminal history. At this point, I sigh. Little chance of fighting this one. Entered without inspection means that he crossed the border undetected by law enforcement, and options are limited for those folks. Previous deportation means that he would be subject to what's called reinstatement of removal, meaning that Immigrations and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, can deport him back to Mexico without the opportunity to present any case at all before the immigration judge. I read further on in the notes, married to a U.S. citizen, 2 U.S. citizen kids. At this point, my heart breaks a little. Another family likely shattered. His name is Antonio, and I dread meeting with him at the federal detention center, but I decide to go that night anyway. He deserves to have someone explain his options, or really his lack of options. He deserves to know that he should not waste energy fighting his deportation and separation from his family because the law gives him no grounds to fight. I go home and get my own 2 kids dinner, tuck them into bed, and go off to the detention center. After a short wait in the attorney meeting rooms, Antonio's brought down. I introduce myself to him, and I start asking him some questions, and I find myself liking him immediately. We were both born in the same year, 1968, and our kids were just about the same ages. His Jade had just turned 4, and Raquel was 3. His English was excellent, and he tells me that both of his wife worked in food service, he in restaurants, and she at a 5-star hotel. They had no other family on Maui, and they tag team childcare with each other, so they actually get very little time together. How'd you get picked up, I ask, and he tells me that he was arriving home with his girls in the car, and he pulled into the parking lot of their Lahaina apartment complex. ICE agents were waiting for him in the lot. He parked and took his girls out of the car seats and was approached by agents who asked him to show identification. That was the beginning of the end. As he was being taken away, he told me how one of the agents commented on how beautiful his daughters were. At that point in the meeting, Antonio starts crying. He wipes his tears and apologizes, telling me that he's tried to remain strong, and this is the first time in all of this that he's cried. Tears well up in my eyes, too. I know what his future holds, and that his life and the life of his wife and daughters will never be the same, and I tell him it's fine to cry. And then I start explaining the ugly reality of the current immigration law and how it applies to him and his family, which makes him cry some more. I tell him that I'll call his wife after our meeting. She hasn't been able to speak to him since he's been in detention, and he can't make calls out. They're totally cut off from each other, and I'm the lone person passing messages between them. Tell her I love her, he says, and to be strong. We walk back into the waiting room where one guard will take him back to his cell, and I'll be escorted out to the front. I reach to shake his hand, and he asks me for a hug. I really need one, he says. I embrace him, wishing that I could substitute his wife and daughters in my place. Walking out, I share with the officer that I'm a bit depressed after the meeting. The officer's kind, and he says that he understands. But the guy's married to a U.S. citizen, right? And he's got kids. Doesn't that help him? Unfortunately, I explain it does not. And as we approach the door, he says, "Go home and hug your kids." I so appreciate his sweetness at a time when the world feels pretty dark. Arriving home, I look in on my own 2 sleeping children, and I shed more tears. I pull myself together because I have to call his wife and relay the messages to tell her that Antonio will soon be deported back to Mexico and there's nothing that she can do. She breaks down on the phone at that point and then recovers enough to thank me for seeing him and for calling her back. I go to sleep next to my daughter and have dreams of Antonio and his girls. In all the talk of immigration reform, the story of Antonio and his family needs to be told, because these are the stories behind the broken immigration system. These are the human costs of a world where global inequality forces people to take huge risks with their lives to try to make something better for their futures. They leave their homelands and their families and everything familiar to them. And sometimes these people meet and fall in love with others while they're settling in. Sometimes children are born, and sometimes their dreams and families will be shattered. There are some who say, well, he broke the law, he should pay, she knew better, too bad. But I have a hard time imagining them feeling the same way if they could see the grief in Antonio's eyes or the confusion in his daughter's faces when their mom tries to explain them that their dad isn't coming home. I could have written the story about so many people. Right now, the Federal Detention Center, which is located behind the Inner Island Terminal, it's a 7-story cream color building. You've passed it many times, probably without a lot of you knowing what it is. 4B is where the male immigration detainees are held. This was back when actually, and Obama deported lots and lots and lots of people. But one of the things that he did, and he did really too little too late, but he did set up priorities, as I think, John, as you talked about, priorities for removal. And now that priority line is gone. It's pretty much open season on anybody. We haven't seen locally that making a difference in people's lives. I mean, it's still kind of business as usual locally, but we're watching very, very carefully and trying to have all of our, neighbor island networks, attorney networks, social service networks, client networks. If something happens, let us know so that we can investigate, see if it's a rumor, see if it's true, and then find out if there's a pattern or what's going on, because things can change very, very quickly. And because of that, that's why I feel that we need places to be ready to, if things do change quickly, to take people in who may need safety. In all this really dark time, there's, again, very hopeful to have all of you here tonight. There's been just incredible resistance nationally, but locally too, through J20, the Hawaii Coalition for Civil Rights, which formed right after the inauguration, right after the 2 executive orders on immigration on the 25th, and then the Muslim ban on the 27th, and that's a group of 26 organizations. And we've done a lot in a short time. Again, it's kind of all volunteer. There's no paid staff. Through our Attorney General, and we need to make a call and thank Doug Chin, because he's right out on the forefront of this and been so accessible to, we've met with him a number of times. He wants to come, I know he's been here, he really wants to meet with church groups and places of faith. So if you're part of a congregation or a group, contact me or just contact him directly and see if he would come and speak, because in the last meeting we had with him, he said, I really want to come and speak to people. So that level of accessibility was stunning to me. Through the religious communities, all of you tonight, and the work through the city council resolution, and within our state legislature, we have a lot of support. So, I mean, I'd rather be here than a lot of other places in the U.S. right now, that's for sure. We just need to keep the kindred spirits talking, keep bringing more people in, and I guess I'll end it and just leave it to whatever's next. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Claire, and the rest of our panel members.